Good Wednesday evening, everyone. A very special episode of Direct Line. We are honored to have Maryland Transportation Secretary under Governor Hogan, Deputy Transportation Secretary under Governor Ehrlich, Jim Ports. Welcome to the show. And our hosts tonight are Mark Unkofer and Jackie Saxton. Take it away, guys.
Thank you, Dwight. Jim, how you doing? Thanks for joining us.
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. It's always nice to have a new guest on the show. I'm going to be ceding a lot of my time to Mark on this one because he's very excited to talk about transportation. So, Mark, I'll leave it to you to ask the first question.
Well, thank you very much. Obviously, transportation is one of the two major areas, education and transportation, that state government is very involved with. And in Maryland, it's become pretty contentious. There's a sort of the forces or those that see mass transit as being the primary focus of where spending ought to be. And as we've talked about, the money comes from drivers. Well, what's your take on how we got that balance right under the Hogan years?
So a couple of things. One, I will let you know that I served on a Ways and Means Committee, which had both of those issues, education and transportation. And, as you mentioned, the people that pay for mass transit, it's not the users of mass transit, because, a lot of things that we get from government are user fees, right? And there's a small user fee, but it doesn't pay for mass transit. So who pays? People that own vehicles. And how do they pay? Well, they pay through the gas tax. They pay through registration fees. They pay through their licensing. And so everything that's paid for pretty much through mass transit, other than some federal monies and some grants, is paid by vehicle owners who may, or in many cases, may not use the system.
And I know that, Governor Hogan's big thing that he ran on was cutting the tolls. So how did that impact the budget that you were working with?
So that's a really good question, but and it's kind of a misnomer, because there's a general fund, and then there's what they call the TTF fund, which is Transportation Trust Fund, and everything that MDOT gets comes from the Transportation Trust Fund, not the general fund. And then MDTA, which is Maryland Transportation Authority, does not get any general funds and does not get any MDOT funds or TTF funds. They get all their funds through tolls. So it's a completely different budget. So the impacts that Governor Hogan did by cutting tolls and giving hardworking Maryland families more money to spend on, their children for shoes or school products or whatever they might want to, had no impact on the transportation budget or the general fund whatsoever. Although you'll hear legislators say it does, it did not.
So one of the proposals that was out there in the last session from, I guess now, now Chairman Mark Corman, was to maximize, I think it's fair to say, just the way the legislation read, was to create an authority that would support rail, mainly Mark, and would maximize toll revenues. And so I guess as you read it, the idea was to find that level of tolls that would produce the most amount of money, regardless of whatever. Now, obviously, well, let me throw that open. Any sense as to how much tolls would have gone up as a result of that?
I'm not sure exactly how much, because I had left by that time when that bill was introduced this past session, so I didn't see any fiscal notes on it. However, I would say this: it's a faulty way of looking at it. Again, the toll authority, or the Maryland Transportation Authority, which they call the toll facilities, its mission is to take in the revenues, pay down their debt, and pay for their infrastructure. not to take some of that money and put it towards transit. Once again, the vehicle owners and the toll facility users, again, keep in mind, tolls is a fee. It is not a tax. And when you start taking monies out of the toll facility, then you're skewing their ability to pay for their infrastructure, keep fees down, and have a user fee that's equitable for the people who are using it. It's a faulty way of looking at it. You know, there's authorities that they could create that would be transit related. And by the way, the word authority usually means that organization has taxing power. In MDTA's case, it's fee power. And if they created an authority for transit, then they would have that same opportunity to increase the fees or tax the folks to pay for those systems. That's really where they ought to start going, and have the users that use it start paying more for that opportunity.
So you mentioned infrastructure, and I know one of the biggest accomplishments of the Ehrlich administration was the ICC. I have a friend, Nicole Bennett, who every time we drive on the ICC, she stops and throws a claw. So can you talk a little bit about what went into that and why it was such a significant win?
Oh, I can tell you what went into that. So I was deputy secretary and under Bob Flanagan, who was secretary. And Governor Ehrlich said to Bob Flanagan, I want the ICC to be built, and if it isn't built, you're going to be fired. Now, obviously, he was kind of joking, you know, but what Governor Ehrlich was trying to say is that this is one of my number one priorities. He understood what a significant value that roadway could be for that area. You know, it is, everybody calls it the ICC, but keep in mind, it's the inter-county connector, okay? So it's connecting people, getting them off of 495. And I will tell you this, Governor, because I broke several grounds with him on this project, but Governor Ehrlich would always talk about walking through the weeds, you know, and the tall grasses and finding a sign. It was a political sign. Vote for Richard Nixon. That's how long this thing had been studied, for over 40 years. So the time, as Governor Ehrlich said, the time for studying's over. The time for action is now. And I will say that we had predictions of what the amount of traffic would be on that, and it's always exceeded those predictions. Now, people think because they don't see a whole lot of traffic on that road sometimes that it's not meeting its predictions. I'm telling you, it is exceeding them. But what Governor Ehrlich said, and I remember this as clear as yesterday, he said, we're making it 3 lanes because if we only make it 2, sort of like 97, it will be like rush hour all over again, and you will never be able to expand this highway. So he made it 3 lanes on purpose, even though it looks like it's not utilized as much, but I can assure you it's beating all of its predictions. And thank goodness Governor Hogan dedicated the ICC Route 200 after Robert L. Ehrlich Jr. He absolutely drove it. He absolutely made it happen. And he made a whole lot of other roads happen. And we could talk about those, like 43 in Baltimore County that connected east side to Towson, or what I refer to as my ICC, my intercounty connector, the express toll lanes, which took 95 up through White Marsh, from Baltimore City up through White Marsh, from a parking lot in the morning and a parking lot in the afternoon to free-flowing lanes, both in the toll facility and the free lanes. Governor Ehrlich took bold steps, made bold moves because he knew it was the right thing to do. And that's what's so great about Bob Ehrlich.
Let's talk about those toll lanes. That's actually been, as you said, has been a real success, and it's fascinating. It's been part of Maryland for quite some time.
Mm-hmm.
However, we've referenced the precise history for that. However, in Montgomery County, we've had some real challenges with trying to get a 3P to do hot lanes and to get over from the American Legion Bridge over to 270. Now, that's had ups and downs and what have you. Could you elaborate on the challenges that you've kind of encountered in that space?
Sure. Let me first start with the express toll lanes in Baltimore, which
Sure.
is from Baltimore City, Baltimore County, up to or close to Harford County. You know, we took a lot of arrows for that. I personally did, especially in the BPW meetings and stuff like that. But again, we knew it was the right thing to do. The Baltimore Sun, the Washington Post, all of them called it Lexus lanes. It's only for the rich, blah, 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 blah. As absolutely not true. It's been proven that it's not true. And it's for everyday people, especially people who want to go watch their kid's soccer game and they're running late from work or they got to get to a doctor's appointment. They utilize these lanes all the time, and it gets them to where they need to be on time. It has worked so well, as I mentioned, from a parking lot to free-flowing lanes, that it became Harford County's #1 priority. This is Harford County, very conservative county. Their #1 priority to extend this express lane toll lanes up through 152, which is Mountain Road, and Route 24. So we saw how well they worked. We saw how well the ICC worked and how people were utilizing it. So the next normal step, since there's just not enough money to fund all that we need to do as far as infrastructure goes in the state of Maryland, especially when you're taking half or more than half for transit. Okay. If you didn't do that, we might have plenty of money. But we thought under Pete Ron, we thought that by extending the toll lanes around 495 and up through 270 would significantly reduce traffic. Now, in my opinion, and I was in the state legislature for 12 years, so I understand politics. In my opinion, the Democrats didn't want that to happen because they didn't want Hogan to have a win. And I'm telling you, it would have been a big win. But Hogan would have had that win because of all the pre-work, if you will, with the express toll lanes and the ICC that Governor Ehrlich started. Because Governor Ehrlich started the first toll lanes like that in Maryland. And we know it works well. And I feel sorry for the people of Montgomery and Prince George's County now because the legislature stopped that process.
So I want to talk about another very costly transportation project that has gone. I have a project management degree, and we study this as an example of something that has gone so far over budget and so over time. It's just a hot mess. So let's talk about the Purple Line a little bit.
Okay. All right. Well, the Purple Line was not under Governor Ehrlich, as you know. The Purple Line, I mean, if you want my opinion, let's talk about the Silver Line in Virginia. The Silver Line in Virginia was taken over by WMATA. In my opinion, the Purple Line should have been taken over by WMATA also.
I didn't realize they were separate. I figured every line was owned by WMATA. No?
No, it's owned by the state of Maryland. And Maryland's responsible for the operating cost of that, or, working with a vendor who is going to be responsible for that. Part of the problem is you're going through an urban area, you're going through a college, and trying to work on roads going through urban areas, especially Montgomery County and parts of Prince George's County. it becomes extremely expensive. The other part of that is, as you're doing construction, the legislature is banging on you about the congestion and stuff that's occurring because you're working on it. Well, you can't work on it without having impacts to traffic. It's just impossible, right? And of course you got the tunnels and all that. It's going to be a very expensive project. Part of that is because of all of the holdups by the legislature, right? They kept, let me back up. A large part of that increase in cost was because of the judge whose wife was on the committee that was protesting this purple line through the, let's call it the more rich areas of Montgomery County. Although I didn't hear the press calling it Lexus lanes there. But the rich areas of that county where they didn't want it coming through their county. And so it was held up for over 2 years. So think about how interest rates go up. Think about how the cost of living goes up as you wait 2 years. On a $5 billion project, another 3%, I can't do that off my top of my head too quickly maybe, but I'm guessing about $150 million a year or something like that. So you're talking about some serious money when a judge who actually had no authority to stop this project held it up for nearly 2 years. As a matter of fact, I say he had no authority to do it because he was overruled by a higher court. And that doesn't happen often, but it did happen in this case. And then you had the legislature who started putting up, ways to slow it down and stop it and get involved. And so as all that was occurring, costs were going up. And then COVID hit, which made everything go up. Wood, metal, steel, concrete, asphalt, everything went through the roof due to COVID because all the production stopped. And so when you start factoring all those things in, that's why the cost got out of control. There's just no other way to control it.
It might get done eventually.
It'll eventually get completed, but it's going to be interesting to watch.
It's an interesting contrast of the politics in Maryland. First of all, you talked about the ICC, and it was interesting. That was bipartisan in the sense that there were a number of Democrats, such as County Executive Doug Duncan, and a number of people affiliated with him who were strong supporters of that and saw the need of dealing with congestion. So it was an interesting coalition that built around that. Doesn't seem like.
But I'd say one thing on that.
Sure.
Because you're bringing up a very, very good point. Every politician that ran for office that year that was opposed to the ICC lost.
Right.
Every politician that was in support of the ICC won. Now, take that one step further in politics. That meant that the people in that area were sick and tired of being caught in congestion, and they wanted relief. And so take that concept with the ICC, fast forward it to the other tolls that we could have had on 495 and 270. I think you should have the same thing. People are sick and tired of sitting in traffic.
I was going to make the observation. I've spent a fair amount of time with transportation folks in Virginia and have been involved with the construction of the Silver Line. It's fascinating that among Virginia Democrats, there's a sort of all of the above approach to transportation policy. So as you know, they have express lanes on 495. And I've talked to more than a few Virginia Democrats who say, when are we going to build a third bridge? And I'm not quite sure we're ready for that in Maryland. But it's an interesting contrast with Maryland, where really there is a, for lack of better words, kind of a mass transit only approach to transportation policy, at least among Montgomery County Democrats.
That is so true. But so when I was in the legislature, I told you I was in Ways and Means, so I did a lot of work on transportation. And I remember talking to some Democrats in Montgomery County, elected officials, and I said something about school bus, and I also talked about mass transit buses, and I remember the delegate said, "Delegate Ports, you just don't understand. People in Montgomery County are not going to ride a bus." And I thought, that's really odd because y'all talk about mass transit. So everybody loves mass transit, by the way, for someone else.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, then I said, and this really ticked off a lot of the Democrats. I said, y'all have the best transit system, one of the best transit systems in the country. They look at me a little odd. And they said, what's that? I said, it's called a school bus. School bus picks you up from your home, takes you to your destination, takes you from your destination, which is the school, and brings you back home. By the way, for free. And nobody puts their kids on the bus down there. They all drive their kids to school.
Yep.
During rush hour. Doesn't that seem kind of ironic that the same people who say they're supporting transit won't put their kids on transit, that they prefer to drive them during rush hour, causing more congestion, causing more pollution? They drive their kids to school and they pick them up every day.
And I bet every single one of them complains about global warming.
Of course they do. So my point is, again, everybody down there loves mass transit for someone else, but not for them. And if you look at, and I mentioned this a few times when I was secretary, and I actually mentioned to a reporter, and she was embarrassed at that point because she drove her kids and was pounding me on why we're not doing more for mass transit. I said, because of people like you. So anyway, feel free to use any of that if you like.
So we talked about this a little bit before the show. As Young Republicans chair, we have picked up on a huge issue that the state legislature is trying to push is the next, the new gas tax, because they realize that keeping the gas tax tied to inflation is ridiculous and we can't afford it, is they want to do a mileage tax. And obviously it's a horrible idea for several reasons, including, it disproportionately impacts people like Uber drivers and people who live in rural communities instead of, the Montgomery people, again, who work from home and don't have to travel to and from the work or commute. So what's the best way as somebody who's been both in MDOT and in the legislature to combat bad bills like this that disproportionately affect people who probably can't even afford to pay that kind of tax?
Yeah. So before I get to that, let me say one more thing about mass transit. I ran mass transit for Harford County for about 7 years. So I understand there is a need for that. I do want to make that clear. But I just want to say that a lot of the people who scream and holler about it really have nothing to do with it. But anyway, your point about a mileage tax absolutely significantly impacts rural folks, and not just because they have to drive longer, but because they're the ones that the farmers and stuff like that usually have the larger pickup trucks and vehicles that don't get as good a gas mileage. And so they end up paying more in gas tax, which they're already doing right now because they get less gas mileage, and they're going to pay more under this proposal because of the mileage that they drive versus other people, especially in cities or areas where they're going to be close, or like you said, that's a very good point about working from home. A lot of these rural folks, they can't work from home. They're plumbers, they're electricians, they're they put up fences. You can't do that stuff from home, right?
Mhm.
You can work in an office from home. And then the other side of that is, once again, you're going to have these folks that are going to even pay more because they're driving more miles. And a lot of that money is going to be funneled off to transit, which once again, they will not be using. So it's kind of a really unfair or inequitable system that they're trying to drive. They do need to put more money into the transportation system. There's no question about that. But quite frankly, what they should be doing is coming up with a fee for the EV drivers, the ones that aren't paying any gas tax, but they're still using the roads.
Right.
The gas tax isn't because you're using more gas. It's because you're utilizing the road system.
Right.
So what they should be doing is coming up with a system, an equitable system, to charge the EV users some kind of fee for using the roads.
And the equity part of the side, the way that they're proposing knowing how many miles you drive is by putting a GPS tracker in your car. How does that work exactly? Because to me, that just seems like a massive violation of privacy.
That is Big Brother at its worst. And let me say this. So when I was back in the legislature, way back when, and they were talking about taking pictures for tolls, right? Toll facilities. The legislature made sure that there would be no pictures inside that vehicle. There was going to be the tag only, for the very reason that you're bringing up right now, because it's an invasion of privacy. I cannot believe that anyone would propose such a bill that would infringe on people's privacy. It's insane.
Yeah, so it's definitely something that we are definitely working to push back against that. The Big Brother side of it, the inequity side of it. Yeah, it's
Sure.
just bad bills all around.
Absolutely. And once again, the people who use transit will pay nothing into this system, but they're going to reap the benefits because they're going to funnel that money off, all that extra money, a lot of that extra money, into transit once again. And so it's not going to be used or utilized for infrastructure that would help the people who are actually paying the bills.
Let me turn to another topic, to kind of Baltimore and the rest of the state. And this is obviously the governor has proposed expanding the capacity of the Bay Bridge with another span. And the Baltimore Sun editorially weighed in on this, saying that as a result of climate change, that capacity, basically the state shouldn't do that because the east shore is too fragile, and therefore if you build a bridge, more people will go over there, and because of climate change, you shouldn't do that. At the same time, I might add that they're pushing very hard for the red line. Any comments about that?
So keep in mind that on the red line, there were a lot of Democrats, a lot of elected officials around for office that were opposed to that too. The tunnels in that area would have been extraordinarily expensive.
Right.
And there's a lot of copper, which is a product made by Honeywell that got put into the ground as fill, which once it's disturbed and it gets wet, expands and heaves up the ground all over the place. It's a very volatile product that they hid, and they told everybody not to say anything about it because voila, they were going to discover it later and have the state taxpayers pay for it. That's one. Two, when it comes to the Bay Bridge, I think I mentioned this actually before we came on. The first one was in, I believe, in '58. That bridge is over 70 years old. Okay. No, wait a minute. It must be Must be
Coming up on 70. Yeah,
52.
65.
No,
Yeah.
it must be 52. It must have been in 52 because I think it's
Okay.
around 70 years old. And so that bridge is going to have to be replaced no matter what the Sun paper or the Post says, because you can only maintain a bridge for so long and then it falls apart, right? It's like anything else. When it gets old, like when I get old, I fall apart. And so it's going to have to be replaced no matter what. The other bridge was, I believe, 1972. So there again, you have a bridge that's over 50 years old, or around that, and there again, by the time they get permitting, by the time they get the funding, by the time they get around to building this, that bridge is going to be difficult to maintain. So no matter what, there's going to have to be another bridge. And I don't understand why the Baltimore Sun doesn't understand that, other than the fact they don't understand anything because they've never built anything. They've never done anything except, put things in the paper. And they have to worry about grammar and spelling. And sometimes they can't even get that right? So I don't understand why they would be pushing back on this, except for this I guess, religion in their extent about climate change. Because if both of those bridges fail, and they will fail eventually, there will be no way to get across that bay. And it'll be back to the way it used to be, trying to take ferries. And there is no way in this day and age that a ferry system will work, because there are too many people who live on the Eastern Shore and travel to the Western Shore to work, play, do sport, kids do sports, all that kind of stuff. I just don't get it. It's going to have to be replaced, and it should be a wider bridge, because quite frankly, what causes more pollution is cars sitting and idling. They have less pollution when they're going especially at highway speeds. And quite frankly, the catalytic converters that we have today, they are like 99.98% effective and put hardly anything into the air. I just think it's a failed argument. And once again, just like when they opposed Lexus lanes, and they were wrong, when they opposed this during the airport expansion, and they were wrong. And, it's just, they oppose everything. Matter of fact, one thing they did support was all this crime legislation that reduced crimes for kids, reduced crime for criminals, defunded the police, and all that went the other direction too. And now we're suffering with those bad decisions that they supported.
Mark, do you have any other burning transportation questions?
No, I'll pass the baton back to you, Jackie. I'll control
right.
myself here.
Y'all can go get dinner after this, right? So a week from now, the state party is celebrating our 20-year salute to Bob Ehrlich.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to spend a little time talking about that, and what some of your favorite memories are of working under Governor Bob, and just your shout out to him for 20 years.
Okay. So first of all, it was a privilege to sit 2 seats away from him on the House floor in my first term, his second term. And then it was once again a privilege to work with him when he went to Congress, because the district that he represented, or the district I represented, along with Al Renber, was pretty much fully enveloped into the congressional district that he represented, and we worked hand in hand. So obviously, if it was a post office issue or Social Security issue, we would flip it to him. If it was some kind of other issue that was on the local level or state level, they would flip it to us, and we worked hand in hand very closely together, and we became very, very good friends. And I will say this about Bob Ehrlich. One, he's extremely principled. Two, he knows policy like nobody else does. And 3, he has extreme integrity. And so when you put all that together, you come up with a guy who, according to policy, knows what direction to go in, has a lot of integrity, and will do the right thing no matter what, whether it is going to impact him negatively or not. And I can assure you that every time he called me down to the governor's office to talk about an issue, he knew nearly as much as I did about the issue before we started. He was incredibly conscious about learning everything he could about everything everybody did, and he was a in the weeds kind of guy, and that's how we got so much done. That's how we got the ICC done, because he pushed it. That's how we got AB Terminal that was expanded with a new baggage system, was supposed to last for decades, but now needs a refresher. By the way, another one is the concessions at the airport. You might remember they had that awful concessions prior to us, where they had a Burger King and maybe a Dunkin' Donuts and stuff like that. They had hardly any concessions whatsoever, and we went to what they referred to as the mall model, which is the model that they have today, which gives all the customers tremendous opportunities to pick pretty much anything they want, by the way, at on-street prices, because remember, the airports used to gouge you because you were trapped, and it was street prices. So whatever they charged, if McDonald's or whatever Burger King or Dunkin' Donuts charged outside the airport, they had to charge inside the airport. And we increased revenue to the airport, gave the customers a better experience and better options throughout. And one of my favorite things about Bob Ehrlich, and I can say this, I was cutting the grass one day, and I get a call from Greg Massoni worked for Bob Ehrlich, and would call you. He said, "Yeah, this is Greg Massoni." I said, "Oh boy, here we go. I know Governor Ehrlich's on his line." He said, "Yep, Governor wants to talk to you." It was a Saturday. Like I said, I'm cutting grass, and the governor said, "Jimmy, we're having problems at the toll facilities. We need to suspend tolls." And I'm sitting there thinking, that's a really bad idea. And the reason it's a bad idea is because if you inject politics into the tolls, those toll facilities are paid by bonds. Bonds are paid for by people who invest in bonds. And so if you disrupt the market, your next bond that you're going to pay for is going to be through the roof, right? Because you're injecting politics into it, and you're changing the market structure, right? And so I said, "Governor, no, I don't think we should do that, and I don't think we can do that." He says, "Of course we can. I'm the governor. We can do it." And I said, I thought, okay, I got to take a different tack, right? I said, "Well, Governor, you're right. You're right. But we can do what you're asking us to do. However, this is how it's going to impact us." And I told him how it would impact investors. I told him how it would impact the bond rating. We might lose our AAA or AA plus bond rating, which would cost us more money in the future. And he goes, "We can't do that." I said, "That's a great idea, Governor. You're right." And it's one of my favorite stories to tell about Bob Ehrlich, because it shows that the guy had a problem. He wanted it fixed. He was willing to do bold things. But when you tell him, be honest with him, that it's really not a good idea and why, he didn't hesitate changing his mind. That, to me, is a terrific leader to work for, and with, I should say with, because you never felt like you worked for Bob Ehrlich. You just felt like you worked with him, and then he did things like the 300th anniversary of the port, naming it after Helen Dillon Bentley. I mean, these are all, another good Republican, right? We did We did port security and airport security, and we worked with the feds. We were the first ones to have a vacuum machine at the port, and then Eagle technology to look at all the containers shortly after 9/11. We were the very first ones to have the airport monitors that you go through now, with the scanners. We were the very first airport to have those, and we worked with the feds to get that. These were bold things that occurred. I think my other favorite, probably one of my favorite stories, and I won't get into the whole story, was when we had the bomber who was hiding the liquids, and they knew in England, they knew, or they heard they were going to hit one of the Washington airports. So it's Dulles, Reagan, BWI, right? They didn't know which one. But he calls me up. I think it was about 1:30 in the morning. FBI's on and CIA and everybody's on this call. And he says, we gotta create an operation to take everybody's liquids away from them when they come in the morning. I was like, you gotta be kidding me. You want me to do that? He's like, yeah, we have to. It's 1:30 in the morning. So about 4 o'clock in the morning, we had another call with the same folks, FBI, CIA, everybody, and the governor, myself. He said, do you have the plan ready? I said, yeah, it's ready. We had to have it ready by 5 o'clock. Then we started taking everybody's liquids away. People were furious, but we told them why. And he was there with us every step of the way, all night long. And we made sure people were safe. The one thing people didn't know is my son, who played soccer, was in England at that airport at that time. And I told my son he's in the safest place in the world right now, but I couldn't tell him why. And when we got all done, then we talked about it. But Bob Ehrlich understood that Homeland Security was so important that we did those things with the federal government for the airport and the port. But he also sent a team, one of which I was. He sent his Homeland Security folks to Israel to train on Homeland Security. And we set up one of the best Homeland Security systems in the nation. It became a model for the nation when we started the Fusion Center, where we house local, state, and federal law enforcement together so that everybody would have the same information from the ground level up. And it literally became a national model. Those are the things, the bold things that Governor Ehrlich did. He did a whole lot of other things, but I can tell you that he was a man of conviction. And he was also a very, very nice friend. And I'm still very proud to this day to call him a friend.
Well, I think that is a beautiful note to end on. So with that, we are looking forward to seeing all of you at the Salute to Bob Ehrlich dinner a week from tomorrow, October 12th, at the BWI Hilton, and you can buy your tickets at mdgop.org. Jim, thank you so much for joining us tonight, and Mark, as always, thank you for co-hosting with me, and thank you everyone for watching. We'll be back next week with another guest.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
See you next week.
Yes.